Okay, gentlemen, we've been working on our City Point project now for 8 years in terms of research and 3 years in terms of hands-on. The team and I have been focusing to start with on City Point itself, and it was one of the first things that got my attention to it was this photograph, which we all know. Uh, that was about 8 years ago I first saw it, and I got fascinated by it. Thought, well, what's the possibility of turning it into a virtual 3D environment? So we started working on it, and the photography was amazing that was available for it because it was one of the most photographed sites in the Civil War. It was easy reach of the north. All the northern newspapers sent down reporters and artists to draw it, and photographers. So we started accessing the available photography and identifying all the individual elements of the photographs. We were all new to it. Our team is about 5 people. We have 2 very skilled modelers, one who's a professional architect, and myself. I do most of the modeling of the physical stuff. Tim Muir does our trains. Steve does our landscape, and Paul is the architect who does plans for us and elevations and also does modeling. The information that got to the rest of the world about City Point and this part of the war was all through the newspapers, like Harper's Weekly. This is one of the standard lithographs that showed the port installation that served. The Army of the Potomac was 160,000 men. They were in siege around the city of Petersburg, and they had to be supplied. And so they were supplied by over 200 ships a day at a deepwater port at City Point, and we started modeling it. This was one of our very first areas of the route we modeled. We're using an older modeling program called for Microsoft Train Simulator, which is the program that runs the route. It allows us to operate trains fully, either from the cab or riding in the passenger car or with a free-flying camera. And this was the engine house and the car shop, the docks work, the coal wharf, and this was 2 years ago. This was the development of the housing for the workers for the railway, and we had to advance through each stage of this using photography, using maps. The Army did some very high detailed maps at the end of the war, which have been of great help to us. But we basically had to use USGS and real DEM data to do the landscape, which is as accurate as possible. And this was the beginning of the City Point site with the docks in the foreground. Each of these warehouses was dedicated to a specific job. This little square one here was the post office, that served the Army post office for all the soldiers. This was the, the prison camp for malcontents. This was the yard for the yard. Up here is the Army bakery, which made 10,000 loaves of bread a day. And this is the beginning of the development. There was a small town there, now called Hopewell, and we were determined to do the entire town, the whole region, and Petersburg, which is here in the very distance. So the railroad itself ran 18 miles across Virginia to the front lines around Petersburg, and the siege began in the fall of 1864 and lasted until April of 1865, so it was the longest siege of the war. This was our method. This is an overlay of the map made by the Army in 1865, and we were able to place each building individually on the map accurately because Steve, who does our landscape work, is a genius at this stuff, and he worked out how to get the map onto the landscape for us to do the placements in the appropriate place. So these are the tools we used. This is about a year and a half ago. So we had developed at this point most of the port facilities. I did the modeling on all the ships. It will have active shipping. In other words, the ships will come and go and move dynamically using AI once the route is active. The trains will also operate, some of them automatically, and the player or the user can enter the route and either drive it or just watch the activity. So we're designing it to be a museum display. And it'll be for the the Park Service and other historical associations when it's completed, and it will probably take another year or two. This is the famous scene looking into City Point, the engine house, the car shop, the yard, and the ships in the distance, which were delivering constantly. And actually, a lot of shipping that used were schooners because they were wooden ships and were the lowest risk for carrying ammunition and ordnance. They could basically hoist anything out using their booms, so they were very good at supplying, and they could get anywhere. So, as the route is dedicated to railroading, Tim Muir is our genius at modeling. So he basically had to start from scratch. There are very few plans of the early locomotives, as you guys all know. Actually, almost none. So people like John Ott, who've been pioneers in the research, have been great assistants to us. But Tim has spent years now working on this. And each of these models he makes is completely accurate down to the individual pieces. And it took him a year to complete the first engine. This is actually it right here. It was the General Haupt. They're fully operational. The drivers all work authentically. The sounds are authentic, actually made from recordings of actual engines. And the cabs, basically you drive from the cab, so you can either ride in it or the camera will follow the train as it's operating. This is one of the drawings done at the time by a newspaper artist showing the City Point installation. So we used any source we possibly could to get information about this because there's nothing left there now except for the foundations of some of the wharfs. Some of these drawings we found were very accurate. All the details in this are accurate. The buildings were actually where they're shown in the drawing. The train is a little weird, but they did their best. And this is the port facility as it's toward the end of its development. Interesting enough, as some of you may know, a lot of the railroad equipment was brought in on barges like this. This is a barge with boxcars on it being brought to the loading dock by a tug. And they developed a ingenious system. Because this was tidal, the ramp had to go up and down, and the cars would basically be driven right off the barges onto the tracks. The locomotives are brought in with the tenders empty and the water drained for the less of weight, so they had to have a water tank right here to fill them up. This was the carpentry shop. These were all the quartermaster warehouses. This is building material. They used an incredible amount of material. They built 250 temporary buildings there. And at the end of the war, Dr. Eppes, who owned the land up there, bought all the remaining buildings and burned them down. So he wasn't very fond of the unions. This is the docks in operation. We have added all the detail we possibly could, including figures, which all had to be modeled. We had to research the wagons and all the horse-drawn equipment, as well as the ships. The ships have the walking beam steam engines of that era. The sailing ships all have accurate rigging, and that was a job all by itself. And the ships all now have sailors and officers, so that was a feat to achieve. This is the docks in full detail, which we had hoped to have. And this took us, about a year and a half to get to this stage of City Point. This is the arsenal dock here. This is the coal docks. They put the arsenal out here because originally it was stored on the shore, and a Confederate spy got into it and blew it up in the fall of 1864. So they put it out here on a wharf that made it easier to protect. But this shows the detail that we were able to achieve. It's not easy. It takes a lot of work to research it. We had to basically develop everything, including all the horse-drawn equipment, which is accurate, the figures with accurate uniforms, various postures for the soldiers. This is, one of the units of the Army marching. Developing the cavalry was an interesting challenge by itself. The markings are all accurate for the regiments. This is an actual drum from this particular regiment, which we found in the museum. This is the Farrier Blacksmith. They had 28 farriers serving the Army because there was 60,000 horses at City Point and 120,000 mules. So they had a constant job. The mules and the horses pulled the standard utility wagons called escort wagons, and we developed all this to have the route be as much detail as possible. This is a typical Army encampment, and basically, once we did the research, we had to basically create all this stuff using our imagination as best we could. So it's as accurate as we can get it. This is a standard camp cooking facility. It was actually developed by the French Army and adopted by the Union by the end of the war. The men were under canvas as little as possible. As soon as they could, they built more permanent shelters. This is the supply system. And so this shows, I put this picture in here because it shows the integration of the railway with the supply system for the Army. And this is, these scenes are created as much as possible from photographs. There's a photograph of exactly this scene just about. And this is a typical inspection train that was used. They ran up to 20 trains a day, so it's pretty complex since it was a single track line, most of it. But they didn't have many accidents. They had a couple engines go off the trestles, but most of the time it operated pretty well. And we have all this as detailed as possible. So this is moving out along the route into the main line, which it ran, basically the railway line followed the Army as it advanced. And so they kept adding track to it until it ended up being about 18 miles. This was our first trestle. And the first train across the trestle, our first test train, made it across. And this shows how we developed the landscape. Basically, it starts out as this basic green. And Steve has to lay down the textures and create the land and put in the rivers and all the trees and add detail. This is the hospital point where the ships would come in and take the wounded up north. And so we've included all this. And once the route is active, we have the capacity to make the wagons and horses move automatically, but that takes a lot of development, and we're not at that stage yet. But the ships was a lot of fun. I love naval history, and the ships of that era were quite beautiful and very efficient, and could go just about anywhere. So this is starting out along the line, and this shows one of Tim's beautiful locomotives. I think this is the, I don't know who that, I'm not sure what engine it is. It might be the May Queen. He's developed now about 15 Union locomotives and 4 Confederate. And each of them takes a tremendous amount of work and research to complete. This is some of the Union library of locomotives. They had about 20 that came through City Point at one point or another. But there were never probably more than 7 or 8 operating line engines, and then a couple yard engines that were a lot smaller. But they are beautiful machines. This was my first exposure to this period of railroad history. We also have been developing the rolling stock. We have about 60 or 70 boxcars for the Union. They're all based on actual boxcars we've identified in photographs. And as much as possible, they're individual, right down the chalk marks on the waymasters on the cars. This is a recreation of a famous photograph of a couple of the most well-known locomotives, the General Grant, and this one I don't remember, right by the engine house. And just showing that we try as much as possible to work from our sources to get the route as completely accurate as we can. But he does beautiful work. These are just tremendously marvelous models that Tim makes. And again, John Ott has been a huge help to us and very generous with his time and his information. And even though we can tell a lot of details about these locomotives from the photographs, often there's just one photograph to work with. So Tim has to get underneath and figure out how all the machinery works and what goes where and what the developments were and the advances in technology, because it was changing all the time. And people were adding new things. This shows the detail of the cabs. And it's incredible what Tim has been able to achieve. All these levers work, the gauges work, the needles move, They indicate accurately the level of water in the tender. And there's two methods of driving. One is push the button and make it go, which I use. And the other is accurate. In other words, no brakes on the locomotive. You have to use the tender brakes. You have to use the Johnson bar to control the locomotive. You have to watch the feed to the firebox. You have to watch the water
Oh
and
man.
everything. So you're it. It's kind of incredible that the computers can do this, but they can. This is one of our first Confederate locomotives, the Kelvin Graves, and Tim did a beautiful job on it. And he just is incredible about the detail he gets in. It's
God.
I'm still blown away by looking at it.
Gilded plates. Wow.
This is one of our Confederate railway cars, a box car, and what they call a platform car or a flat car at the depot in Petersburg. And these are completely recreated from photographs. So these were cars that actually rode on wheels in 1865. There was some rolling stock left in Petersburg, but the Union Army made it and started photographing things. Some of it was destroyed. As much of it was possible was moved away. But at that point of the war, there wasn't really hardly anywhere to take anything. So pretty much that was the end of things. But Tim adds just amazing detail to the textures, and you can tell where this was painted out at some point. So this is one of his latest locomotives he's made, and they had some remarkable cab designs. This was a rounded front with almost like a monitor roof, and this is one of the locomotives on the on the South Side Railway. And again, the livery is as accurate as possible. This John and Tim worked together figuring out the coloring of this stuff. And this is one of the earlier locomotives. Excuse me? What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, that's such a cool design with that cab. Oh my God.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. And they had the sidebars here for the earlier design of locomotives. The South started out with a pretty limited inventory of locomotives. They did steal a bunch of them from the North and move them down in a remarkable process. But they always had trouble keeping the railroads running. And this is a close-up of that cab. It's quite remarkable. It's, among other things, it's amazing cabinet work. I mean, it was not an easy thing to make. But this has been and because this is the history of a railroad, the railroad is a big part of it. These are the main actors of the route, and they just are. They'll be wonderful to present when we get to the point of releasing the route. And this is one of the locomotives that Tim has just made recently on the turntable at City Point. The turntables along the route all operate. Basically, you can control them. When the engineer approaches, they can control the spin of it. And these are a couple of the other Southern boxcars with their different designs. They had unusual doors. They tried a lot of different things. And again, the gauge in the route was large gauge. So when the North moved in and finally occupied Petersburg, they had to change the gauge of all the railroads. So it was not an easy thing. And this is our first complete Southern train, Confederate train, with an accurate locomotive and all the cars accurate based on all the research we'd be able to do. And so Tim has been working on that while the rest of us have been working on developing the route and all the scenery. So Petersburg. Petersburg was a town of about 30,000 people, and it was the third largest city in the South at the time. It was an industrial center. It was based originally on tobacco, and tobacco, they found out, used up the soil very quickly. So even though it was a very lucrative crop and continued during the war before the war to be part of the Southern economy, they had switched to cotton. And this was one of the major ports that exported cotton, along with the other major, like Charleston. but there was the river, the Appomattox River, came into uh, Petersburg from here and traveled right along the town. So the river is a major feature of the town, and the industry was along the river because a lot of it was water powered. Up the river this way, there were 20 large mills that used water wheels for power, and it was an industrial center, it was the Detroit of the South, along with Richmond. And so we have these 4 photographs are the best record we have. They were taken by Thomas Brady from a hill on the south side of town. And these are high resolution photographs. So basically we can get down to the size of an individual person's face by enlarging these photographs. One of the major features and one of the things that allow us to triangulate the town are the churches. There was kind of a steeple war, and all the churches built higher and higher steeples, which is a great help to us for figuring out where things are. But this was something else we had to figure out. We had to learn the whole process of the city and how things worked, because it was completely new to all of us. We didn't know anything about it. Again, fortunately, we had some very accurate maps. This is a series of maps that was done at the end of the war. I'm not quite sure why they did it, but they did it. The Army did it with their engineers and their cartographers. And this is, as far as we can tell, completely accurate. We can lay it onto a grid using USGS maps, and this fits. This is the town itself, the downtown area with large buildings. And then the river was here, the railway. 3 railways came into town. This was the Weldon and Lynchburg. This is the route up to Richmond, the Richmond Railroad. And this line, the south side, was the main supply line into Petersburg, and why the city was so important at the end of the war, because all the produce from the south came into the Confederacy along this railroad. And which is why the Union Army invaded where it did. And the battle lines were basically around here. And so eventually we will be modeling the trenches and the battlefield. But at this point, we're getting in the streets and starting to put the buildings in. We have the track all laid. We have the major railroad facilities in. We've got this roundhouse built. And the major depot for the south side was right here along the river. We have that built. And this complex here was the main engine shops for the South Side Railway. And that turned out to be a very interesting project, because there turned out to be quite a bit of information about it. But every step of the way, we've had to do research to try and figure out what was where. Because at this point, most of the stuff, well, about a third of these buildings are still here. Petersburg has not gone into happy times because of the failure of the tobacco world. But this is a blow up of that panoramic photograph I showed you. And you imagine the amount of detail we can get. So we will be going through these photographs one by one and building these buildings. That's my job. This will take us another year to do this town, but we're determined to do it as accurately as possible. And this is one of the major railroad infrastructure facilities that was there at the time. This is the Weldon Railroad Roundhouse.
Right.
And it's been a gold mine for us, because there's the rolling stock here for detail. There's a coal jimmy here. There were big coal mines in the area, so Tim has modeled those. We have a whole train of those made. These are passenger cars under construction that were never completed. This is a box car, another flat car over here. And, and a turntable and all the stalls. And because we're fortunate enough to have Paul Gonski, who's our team architect, a master architect for one of the large firms in Chicago, he built the roundhouse. And it's fully operational. The turntable turns, the doors open and close. The stalls are all in their interior, and I'll be detailing the interior eventually. This is the roundhouse over here, and back then they built very large train sheds. It was common practice to protect the equipment. So this would be where they would park the passenger cars when they weren't in use. Also, that in the cities, the depots are very large with arched roofs, so basically a larger version of this. But this is the only photograph we have of Southern passenger cars. And we know they're Southern because the gauge was too big for anything from the North. So they hadn't converted the line when this photograph was taken. So it's the only source we have for passenger cars, which we know were painted red and white. So using these photographs, we built the Roundhouse, and there it is. Paul does amazing work. He's an architect. He can he can do a good job, and this is what we're very proud of. This came out very nicely. There it is for the train on the turntable. That's the general help visiting, and just truly, each of these is an achievement along our path. This is the interior of the Roundhouse. And it's just remarkable that the computers can do this kind of thing. This is a passenger train coming through the train shed, and the doors eventually will be operable if we want them to be, but we're not going to worry about stuff too much. In the distance here is the courthouse in Petersburg, which I'll be showing to you soon. This is how we use the photographs. We take architectural measurements of the buildings using, Paul has software that can actually determine the exact size of buildings. So he develops the data for us. And these are this is the South Side machine shops. This is the engine house here, the machine shop, and the carpenter shop. And these are cars under construction and all the building material. And this was there at the end of the war. And when the Union Army came in, they cleaned it out. They took everything that wasn't nailed down and they took the nails. So the railroad had to start completely over after the war. But it was right there close to town. And this was the photograph, the original photograph from that series of 3 that we worked on. So using this kind of photograph, we can actually determine, because I've been doing this for a number of years, I've made close to 2,500 buildings. I can tell what's going to be on the other side of these, usually by common practice. But, you have to, it just takes time to get the experience to do it. This is our actual route. This is the site for the machine shops. They had what's called a transfer table to move the engines back and forth. The engine house, when they didn't have a roundhouse, they had just some way to get the engines in and out of a rectangular building. So they had a ramp that moved on wheels, and it was on tracks that moved back and forth, and they could access the 11 stalls of the engine house. It was very common back then to use covered bridges over rivers to protect both the bridge and the trains using them, especially in the winter. And we were able to determine that this railway going over the machine shops actually had these bridges on it by a very interesting process, but I'll get to that in a moment. This is the machine shops in place. The models are completed. Tim has started adding the cars under construction. He makes all these models. This is one of the Southern trains. This is again, this was where the machinery was, and it was all steam powered. So this is this phase of development of that site. This is the arrival of the first Confederate locomotive on the transfer tables. This is how it worked.
Wow.
It ran on wheels on these tracks. And it could move back and forth, and it will be animated in the route if we decide to do that. And this is the site as it was completed. So each stage of this process takes all of us to do, and we all have other things going on. So this, this development of this one site took 3 months over time. And this is looking across the river to Petersburg over here. But we're able to achieve this by using a lot of different tricks, and you basically just have to develop methods to make this work. It's kind of a big guessing by golly. This is an actual transfer table in England. This is how they work. The locomotives will come onto the ramp, and they would actually move these with people power. 2 men on either side could actually move these. There would be flip up levers, and they would basically push it along. So that was a very common technology at the time, but I had never heard of it. So we had to figure out how to do it. And this is the transfer table when it was completed in our model. It was pretty amazing to see how it worked. It's very, very simple engineering, and it works. And this is the machine shop model showing the detailing we add. We add as much clutter as we can to make it look as realistic as possible. And this was a plan we developed. This was actually from a map of that era. So we were able to get the site. This is the transfer table here. This is the engine house with 11 stalls, and the machine shop, the carpenter shop, and eventually there was a foundry there in 1877, but this is how we found it on the map. This shows how we use the maps to triangulate. In other words, these are all the churches, and this is a viewpoint that all those photographs were taken from up on Dunn's Hill. So we're able to develop where things are physically and get it onto the map accurately. Now, this is an interesting story. This is a photograph of those bridges across the river. What the Confederates did when they evacuated Petersburg is they drove a train onto one of the bridges and burned it. There's the engine right here and the train of cars. And this is a very useful photograph because from the debris, we were able to determine it was a covered bridge, and there were two of them. The other one was over there. And also in the distance here is one of the major depots of the Richmond Railroad. So this photograph alone was very helpful to us. But because we have to wait for sources to develop in our research, we often don't have more than just these photographs to start with. This shows the engine, the tender. It was a pretty fierce fire because it melted everything. But using that, we were able to use a map done in 1877. This is the viewpoint of that photograph. And this shows our method for research. This shows the area that are seen in the photograph, and because of this, we were able to detail out the bridges across that river. Now, this map was very hard to find. It was made by a company called Beers, and Beers did atlases of most of the major American cities. And there were 3 copies of this map in this country, but nobody would do a scan of it for us. We found a complete set online in Paris, France. So we were able to actually finally get access to it. This is the bridges. This is a drawing made by a newspaper artist at the end of the war. We just found this drawing a month ago. So it validated all of our work because it shows the train, where the bridges were. Here's the machine shops back here. And this gives us proof. We try to have as much proof as possible of the stuff we put into the route. And our sources can come from anywhere. This is Petersburg today. There isn't much left. This photograph actually shows some of the original buildings and tells me how they did the roof lines, how the buildings were constructed. This is the South Side Depot that you'll see some pictures of shortly. And this is the river that we just showed you pictures of. And this is the overlay of the road system on our landscape using the maps. So this is the downtown area. This is the courthouse right here in the river. This is the South Side Depot. So this is how we start out. This is the naked map, and this is the map we found in Paris. And it actually shows everything. It's incredible detail. It has the names of each property owner on the houses. So this is a godsend to us because this is the entire downtown area that we're going to be working on and gives us the information we need. And this is a close-up of the map. So it's just these individual pieces are what come together to make the puzzle to make it possible. But to do this depot.
Chris, quick question.
Yes? What? Yes.
Yeah, the map that you found in France. This was an American map that was in France.
Yes.
Wow.
They were very fond of the Confederacy, so there's a lot of Confederate data and records in France. But it took us a long time to find it. Fortunately, I'm fluent in French and lived there for a while, so I was able to track it down. But it took a year and a half to find the map. But this is why we wanted it, because here's the bridges going across the river. There they are on the map. this shows the yard.
The line of Mississippi and
So Steve was able to make an accurate yard for the South Side Railway. This is one of the. We only have about 10 or 12 photographs of Petersburg during the war, but each one of them is a gold mine of information. This is the Union Army entering Petersburg. So this shows us, we can identify where this is from the church steeple. It gives us information on the buildings. A lot of the buildings in Petersburg were common buildings. In other words, they developed very early on large apartment buildings. This is an apartment building here, or duplexes, houses with two residents. And so each of these, this showed us the cobbled streets, the sidewalks. They also had a gas works there. They had street lighting. This is the courthouse. There's one of the street lights here. And this photograph alone gives me a tremendous amount of information for making the streets accurate. This is the kind of construction they used of the buildings downtown. It was all brick. They had a large brick works there, which I'll be modeling. And this is a photograph just of some guns stacked in Petersburg, but the tremendous detail about the houses. You can see a lot of here houses that were burned during the war, because the Union Army was shelling the town of Petersburg all the time. Interesting story. The Episcopal minister in Petersburg wrote a letter to General Grant asking him to stop the shelling on Sunday so they could go to church, and he did. So the Union Army did not shell Petersburg on Sunday morning. This is an amazing, there were two of these photographs of street scenes in Petersburg. Just incredibly helpful information to me as a modeler on what the streets look like, what buildings look like. There was this one and this of houses. And this shows how the houses were. Interesting point, the houses are set quite a ways back from the street. Considering most of the traffic in the streets was horses and mules, it was probably a good thing to have the houses a little ways away. But I never would have thought of that. This is a photograph of the railway intersection in the middle of town. But this is another one of those photographs that can be enlarged tremendously. And so there's all this detailed buildings that I can use for modeling. They were rebuilding, the Confederates burned the 3 bridges across the river, so they were rebuilding a bridge. And this is one of the few photographs we have from the Civil War of their heavy-duty cranes for lifting heavy beams. This is a very large beam.
Wow.
That was a construction crane of that era.
Those cotton bales in front of those wagons?
Yes, sir. They were. Oh, sorry, no. Those are fodder. Let me go back to it. These bales here are fodder for the mules. They had to have, for every 10 wagons, they had to have a wagon of fodder for the horses. So fodder was a constant source of supply issues. This drawing is typical of the challenges we had in research. This is the only drawing we have of the depot in downtown Petersburg for the Weldon Railway. These are train cars here. This is the major hotel called Jared's Hotel. And I couldn't get this drawing to match the maps because the hotel was on the wrong side of the street. So I finally figured out this was a drawing made for a newspaper lithographer. In other words, when you print a lithograph or an etching, it has to be backwards. So the drawing is backwards, and that made it fit. So, it took me 3 months to figure that out. This is the hotel that was in that drawing, Jarrett's Hotel. And this is a marvelous flyer that was put up at Jarrett's Hotel after the war, a tour of the battlefields from the southern point of view, which is a remarkable thing, which you found a copy of. So
wow.
This is the kind of information we can get from Petersburg today. This is a building that's still there. And so from this photograph, I can get details of windows, dormers, brick, construction, how the storefronts looked. And from these photographs, I can develop, this is a texture sheet for my modeling that has all the windows, the doors, the architectural elements that I can put on the model once I had the photographs. This is a South Side Depot as it is today. Half of it's missing because a tornado came through in 1968 and took it out. This has been reconstructed, but this model was handed to one of our master modelers Wayne Campbell, who lives in Canada, but he's an incredible modeler. This is the texture that he developed of that building. He does amazing work. He's one of the best I know. And this is the building, the Southside Depot with the freight entrances and the major depot in the middle. And this is his model. So we're able to do very accurate work if we have the hands to do it.
At the time.
Fortunately, in the 1930s, the government, as a WPA project, sent architects and photographers all over the country, and they photographed historic buildings. Not only did they photograph them, this is in Petersburg, this is the Appomattox Iron Works, they also did elevation drawings. So we have access to these, 146 of them for Petersburg. And so we can get as accurate as possible detailing for the models we make. This is a manor house that's to the south of town toward the mill district. And this is one of the big cotton mills, which I'll be showing you shortly in the route because we're going to go into the route now. And this was the way the mills were by the river. They were run on water power. These mills, each of them hired, employed about 1,200 people, half women, half men, half black, half white. And they were the source of Petersburg power and a big part of the southern economy. So remember that picture. And now we're going to look at the actual route. This is the route in the editor that we use. This is City Point. This is what I've been showing you. Petersburg is off there in the distance. And this is the actual model of the route we've made. And so this is how I work. I can add buildings using this software. And this is the railway yard that I was showing you. So this is how we actually create the route. These are the ships.
Chris, we're still seeing the picture of the cotton mill.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me switch to this. Can you see it now?
No, sir, still the mill. There we go. Thank you, sir.
Okay. You got it?
Now we're on
Okay.
you.
This is the editor of the route. Let me go back.
I'm sorry, Chris, we're now on you. We see you.
Okay, hang on.
You had it a moment there.
Is that it?
There we go.
Okay. I'll just keep it there. All right. This is the editor. And this is City Point. And this is the actual software we use for creating the route. So we place the models from an inventory here on the right-hand side of the screen. And actually you can do all the land adjustment here too. But these are the ships. Shows the detail. And so it's basically a 3D world. This is city, this is City Point. This is the housing. This is the major manor house, the Appomattox Manor, which is still there. It shows the officers. There was a telegraph office there that the Union Army sent all the telegrams from. And all the warehouses supplied all the ordnance. This is the cannons lined up to go to the front. And over here we have a cavalry unit marching and an infantry unit. So we can basically create the whole scene using our inventory of models that we create. So this is the route as it follows out. This is the bakery that serviced the army. They built fortifications here to protect the point because it was a major military base. So we've modeled all the ordnance. These are siege guns, standard earthworks of the era. We have some limitations in what we can do because this is an older software, so it's not, as accurate as we might like it. The hospital was all under canvas, so this is the hospital facility. They had a facility for 10,000 patients, and they had a 3% mortality rate, so it was a very successful hospital. These are the evacuation ships I showed you earlier. These are the models of them. And there's some of the officers, the soldiers being evacuated. So I'm determined to have as much detail as possible in this. And the route itself ran 11 miles over to Petersburg. So I'm going to switch us over to Petersburg because I don't want to take forever on this presentation. So let me get this accurate. 37.3117 and whoops. Oh, gotta get that right. Wrong number. 37.2308 and minus 77.40236. Jump.
What are the red lines in a distance?
That's the railway line. That's the active line for the railway. These are all markings that show up in the editor, but aren't visible when you actually get there. Okay, now we're in Petersburg. There's the courthouse. And the courthouse model is, again, one of Wayne's creations. It's incredibly detailed. I can't believe what he's able to do. But that's what a skilled modeler can do. So here's Petersburg, the downtown area. This will be developed. This is up on the hill was a famous mansion called Center Hill, which is still there. This is the industrial district being developed. This is the South Side Depot that I was showing you photographs of. There it is. That's the model. And the railway yard, the lines are all active. In other words, the switches all work. This can all be run automatically using AI, so it can be, automatically operated. Here are the bridges going over to the engine shops. Steve did an amazing job on the river. It looks so accurate to me. It's incredible. But he uses aerial photographs a lot for his modeling. These are the main bridges into town that the Confederates burned. This is the Pocahontas Bridge and one of the railway bridges. This is the railway that ran to Richmond. And up here are the engine shops I was showing you guys. So here's the transfer table. The engine house on the right, the machine shop on the left. This is the construction work going on in the yard and all the cars under construction. And how we start, basically this is the route, how it operates. The trains can go anywhere they want. So once you are driving a train, you can develop them. And up the river here, I just finished this last night, is one of the mill districts. And if you remember that last photograph I showed you of the cotton mills, here they are. That's the photograph. I just finished this last night. This is called Campbell's Bridge. And the mills were right along the water. And that was the facility. So this is basically how we developed the route. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Oh, my God. Thank you indeed.
Wow.
It's a labor of love and also crazy, but I didn't expect to get this deeply into it. Any questions? I'm happy to entertain them.
Yeah, there was one on one of the maps you showed, Chris, where it showed Atlanta, Mississippi, and Ohio Railroad. I never heard of that. Don't go back in there. That's all right. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, they had a lot of small railroads in the South that came and went. Some even just during the war.
Crazy.
That was 1877. Remember, Tom?
Oh, that was.
Oh, thank you. That's why.
What happened was in Petersburg, they had three main railways, but because the town had a grip on freight, they refused to allow them to connect the railroads. So in other words, to move freight from one railroad to another, the carters, the local wagon union, had to move them on wheels until the middle of the war when the Confederate Army said, look, you guys got to hook the, so they hooked the lines up by the end of the war. Well, the general who was in charge of the defenses of Petersburg went into the railway business after the war, and he unified all the railways. So all three railroads in Petersburg ended up under the same management. So that was how that worked.
Chris, what software do you use for modeling?
It's called Microsoft Train Modeler. It's a proprietary program for the train simulator developed by Microsoft in 2002. So it's a CAD program, but it's primitive. But in skilled hands, it can do a lot. It's what Tim uses to make his locomotives. I use to make my models. Wayne Campbell, who did the courthouse and the depot, uses much more sophisticated software. He uses Blender. He's actually one of the developers of Blender. So what I use is fairly basic, but with the texturing right, it can do pretty good. We are thinking about exporting some of our models into resin. That's a whole new ball of wax. We haven't had time to look into it, but we've had a number of requests. Actually, Bernie had hoped we were going to make a tug, and I hope we can. It's just something new to learn about. And I'm the executive, I'm the manager of the project, and the other guys all have lives and work they have to do. So we do what we can when we can.
I love that round cab on the one local. That was cool.
They called them bathtub cabs back then, but I think they're beautiful. So it really surprised me.
Your coal loading, it looked like they would just shovel by hand. It was like hand shovels to go both from the boat to the dock and then the dock to the car.
There was a lot. They had plenty of labor. Just tremendous amounts of manpower doing everything. And so that's what made it possible. Because basically at City Point, they had 6,000 freed slaves as a labor pool. When the slaves left the plantations, they all just got as far north as they could. And they were willing to work for nothing, and did. But they were organized and trained into construction squads. And the military railroad was very efficient in how they used their labor.
I think in an earlier presentation also, there's that like a big pump water wagon on the dock. I think you talked about it. I can't remember. Was that for fire suppression, or what would they use that water for?
They used it for the water tanks. They used pumping engines for water supply. The hospital had two of them. The hospital had a complete water system. And for the water tanks by the docks in City Point, they were called portable steam engines. They used them a lot of ways. They had one at the lumber mill. They used to power the steam power mill. So they were used quite widely during the war. They were on wheels.
Were the lines, did you notice in any photos, were they buried or were they above ground, the water lines from the pumps?
They were buried.
Okay, because I hadn't seen any and I was just wondering if.
Yeah, they like I said, they had the labor, so whatever they needed to do, they just did it.
You got a lot of good information there.
Well, we've had to. To do all this, we've had to research everything. Much of its technology I knew nothing about. I didn't know how a wagon was made. A horse-drawn wagon has 148 parts and uses 15 different kinds of wood. Hickory for the spokes. I mean, it's just, and stuff like that you have to get right. You can't fake it. At least we don't want to. So
Tom, are you listening? You're gonna have to redo all your wagons so they have 15 different types of wood in them now.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. I'll be sure to take a note on that. Yeah. The thing that's so striking, Chris, is how you and your team have been able to find so many different remote, obscure sources and be able to triangulate, whether it's a diagram, a drawing, a photograph, to validate exactly what was in that space. That's one of the coolest things I think that you guys do is the multitude of resources that you're able to uncover and then put these obscure pieces together to make your picture. And the puzzle is just cool.
It's great.
We try to have 3 sources for everything we use, whatever they are.
Right.
That makes us comfortable.
I love it.
I believe. Yeah.
Okay. I love it because a lot of the images of City Point itself, you know, because of other work, I was able to, you know, I knew where those buildings were, but with Petersburg, a lot of the images you've shown are ones that I'm familiar with. However, but what you just did is you put them in context in relationship to a physical map. So now you get much fuller understanding, deeper understanding of how it's working. That's so cool. Amazing research.
It takes me twice as long to develop the textures and the data as it does to make a model. So I'm really not doing modeling until I'm really deep into something. And that's why in Petersburg, I've been working on now for a year.
Wow.
And I'm finally able to do something about it. So
you guys have done a marvelous job.
Well, it's a pleasure to share it with you guys who can see and understand.
Yeah.
And eventually our hope is to preserve the history because these were all, both sides, North and South, were dedicated people who cared a lot about what they were doing. It wasn't just a war, it was a cause. And our hope is to preserve the history without bias, to show both sides and to show what they're able to achieve as people, because it's part of our history, and history gets lost if you don't do that.
You have honored it, Chris. There is no doubt about it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you for letting me share. And the guys.
Thank you.
Does the age of your software cause you any worries?
It's stable. You know, it doesn't need updates. It works and works on modern systems. There is what happened was the software for the simulation was updated 10 years ago by a civilian, a community group, and then a guy in Poland has improved the editor we use. He did an incredible job. So basically, we are using newer generation stuff. It's not the original 2002. It took a long time to get here because the original stuff was very primitive.
In Nebraska, they have a place called Stir Village where they actually have buildings on from about the 1870s. And one of the things interesting, guttering system, at least for 1870, they didn't have external gutters. And I can't remember how it worked. You wouldn't see them, but it actually would gutter stuff. But they said there's a problem with internal rotting because it wasn't like the modern. Well, what did they do for guttering back in the Civil War?
They had metal gutters, cast iron. Petersburg had lots of rain gutters. It was a very sophisticated city. And one of the largest iron centers, they had 12 iron foundries there. So it was very modern. They had a gas works. The city was lit by gaslight. And so the technology back then was quite similar to modern. It's quite surprising. And even at City Point, even in the Army in the field, they ate off of linen at dinner time, and they had very fully developed facilities of all kinds. They had telegraphy. They were in close contact with Washington, D.C. all the time. Letters were constant. Communication between both sides was actually quite unusual. The armies would communicate with each other when they weren't fighting. So there was a lot of commonality to things, and life was very modern, quite surprising.
On one of your photos in the town, also I noticed in the street, the crosswalks seem to be connected by a couple of cement strips. So would they have cement go across the cobblestone?
Yes, because the streets were often wet and horse droppings and all that stuff. So they would cross at the crossings. It was pretty dangerous to walk in the street. Considering what was going on in the streets all the time.
So jaywalkers were were originally ticketed because they were
in danger.
carrying horse droppings all over. So they had to cross a corner.
Yes.
Amazing. So do you guys need a break?
I'm good.
I'm good.
Yeah,
Okay,
Carry on.
well, if so, Tom asked me to do an update on where on the Delaware Central Railroad, so I will proceed to do that. Let's see. No. Go. Sure.
Oh boy.
Good job, DC. You're up and running.
Cold, Jimmy.
And from the beginning, okay. This is the Delaware Central as it stands today. Actually, that photo's not from today. But
That's neat.
this was the grand plan I had started with. The plan, can you see my cursor moving?
Yes, sir.
Okay, where this area is the front of the house, and so the grand plan was to take up the entire width in the front of the house, stairs going to the first floor. I've been planning this, wanting to do a railroad, so probably about 1983. When we actually had moved into a house where I had the ability to do something, and it was going to be like a 4x8 sheet of plywood. I developed this plan, and things have been one thing and another with life. Tom was getting on me to start to actually build something, get some of all the rolling stock I've been building up, and they use some of the buildings I've been building. But I decided that this particular one was going to be too big, so I did consolidate it, deciding to do just one area. This dimensions on this track plan are 12 feet this way and 15 feet this way. I've also revised the plan, so basically it's a loop to loop with a branch to City Point based area. It's not going to be City Point. So this is kind of what I started with. As you may note that I tend to collect things. I've collected things since 1983 designed to go into the final layout. This is the actual room after it's been cleaned out a bit. Again, lots of stuff to deal with. Those are Christmas decorations. Those steps there, as you can see, were rather worn. They also were very, very creaky. That happens in a 60-year-old house. So first thing I needed to do was insulate the ductwork. On the left there, you can see the original pipes. So what would happen when the air conditioning was running in the summer, we'd have like a little rainforest in the basement. So I insulated the two ducts that were running through the ceiling. I wanted to finish the ceiling because it's a rather low basement. I wasn't going to be able to put in a drop ceiling. So I'm trying to get everything up in the ceiling as much as possible. The first thing I did was in that space on the left here, you can see the train room, you can see the treated lumber I use for contact with the ground. Being in Delaware, there's a lot of moisture can come up through a flooring. And then here on the right, you can see the wall I built. There had been a wall in there originally, but because of past flooding, we had a lot of mold and stuff, so I took it all out and threw it away. But as you'll note that these are all used 2x4s, things that I've saved over the years. They're finally getting used. Okay, yeah, accumulate a lot and I don't know, all those years. The next project I undertook was the water meter. The train, if you look at the image on the left, I wasn't quite sure at what height the benchwork was going to be, other than the shut-off valve there that goes to the house was going to be in the wrong place for access, and when the meter would be underneath the layout. So I had some issues with the city of Newark. If you ever needed to come in. Plus, what you can't see up here, it'll be in another photo, but when we bought the house in 1993, there's a shut-off valve to the front spigot that I could never get working, even when I applied wrenches to it. So that was going to be replaced. On the right, Donna's son is a plumber, came in. We've moved if you look down here, we moved the shut-off valve, got a modern shut-off valve put in there. We replaced the valve up there. And something I never knew, you could just take the meter, and he just took it and he twisted it to a 90-degree angle. And so if the city ever needs to come in, they're going to be able to access that. Then the next step was going to be to use the dry lock paint for the walls. So preliminary to that, I masked and taped off anything I didn't want to get this paint onto. And the image on the right, you can see the white. I'm sorry, the image on the left. You can see the white area where I started with the dry lock, and then the other white area is from a contractor I had hired to finish the walls. I ended up firing them because they were doing such a lousy job. You'll also notice the trench here and the plastic here. Couple of things. I did have to widen the trench here to make sure that any water that would come in the house would go into the trench rather than across the layout floor, the floor of the train room. Also, the plastic helped cut down on the dust. And also, in the process of preparing the walls for the dry lock, you have to hit it with an etchant, kind of like uric acid, and rinse it off. And so I was trying to keep, those are all boxes of train stuff, and I definitely did not want to get those wet. On the right-hand image, you can see the second coat of dry lock is the blue coat. And I discovered after the first coat that you can actually get it tinted, and that's the color. That's the completed area. Problem I had is that blue gave me the feeling like I was in a swimming pool. So it's true. The blue walls in the back, this color of cardboard, I worked for a number of years at Sears and was the paint department manager. And I took every shade of blue I could and took it up and cut a little hole in the color chip and held it up to the sky. And that is the actual blue color of the fall sky. And since my layout is going to be set in the fall, that's the color I had mixed up. And then I realized that the light in the train room, even with all the LEDs that I installed, is only going to be about 4,500, and natural sunlight is 5,500. So I diluted that down with a lot of white. After that work was done, next project was the ceiling. You'll see this nifty little innovation here. Can you see that the stacked shelves? Since it was me, myself, and I for most of it, I would take the sheetrock, turn it and lay it on top of there. And then I jury rigged this T support. And it's actually where you see the clamps, there were actually two 2x4s together so I could raise and lower it. So I'd slowly raise one end and then put 2x4s on top of the top shelf and then go back and forth till I was able to install the sheetrock. On the right hand is the ceiling with the about ready to be painted. But before I painted, I had to reinstall the ceiling lights until I'd taken and recorded my measurements very carefully. So you'll see here where the chalk lines are. I drilled a hole in each corner and then cut out between them using a saw that was designed to generate less sheetrock dust. Of course, you know, this is the situation where there's less sheetrock dust going around. Not sure what it would have been like if I had used one of my
Wow.
saber saw or reciprocating saw on that. So after the sheetrock was in and primed, I did install trim. Here it is for the access panel that I made. You can see there's the shutoff valve to the outside. This is part of this box here on the left is part of the city of Newark's where they read the meter from outside. And there's also a trim that I installed between the ceiling and the side walls. On the right here's my setup. I got some U channel. I'm not sure if you can see it. Oops, let me go back. Oops, no, back. U channel, and what I used, it's like 5/8, and it's designed so that it will. I'll show you in a minute. So that it'll trim. I use that as trim around the openings I cut for the ceiling lights. Next one. This is the panel I made for the for that access hatch, and I've been a realtor for a number of years. And the amazing thing about being in real estate is you can be with one company and you stay at that company on your tenured life, and every few years it seems like they're changing over ownership. And so they were tossing all these signs. I pulled a bunch out of the dumpster, so I hope to have a lifetime supply of styrene to use for construction and projects like this. Here's how that aluminum channel, I cut the edges here so that there's like a piece cut out here. I slid one end in, then pushed it so it's flush, and then the other piece of aluminum's over here on the right, and it just butts up against that. The lights themselves are hung from the subfloor from above.
Oh.
On the right, it looks it's unpainted, but it's got the channel. And on the left, you can see how the ceiling lights are. I left the pull strings hanging down. That didn't annoy me. They're actually, like this light here on the right is plugged into the light here on the left. And then behind this wall, I ran an electric line. So every time you see a bank of lights, there's actually an outlet there in which they can be plugged in. I painted this wall, I built this wall also behind the stairs. And I painted it white because if I'm lucky enough to live long enough to get this next section done after this first one, there's going to be a partial of the return loop will be under the stairs, and I wanted to keep it as bright as possible. And since it's not going to be a scenic area, I just left that white. Then we had a flood.
Oh my.
Okay. And
Oh dear.
it was interesting. The water filled up into 1 inch from the top of the 2 walls in the front of the house, the window wells. And of course, they weren't designed to be aquariums, and it was just flooding in. It flooded across the floor. It was coming in so fast that even the drain lines weren't keeping up with it. So on the right, you see me digging by hand a trench, which I will install a drain pipe from the worst offending window well. At the second, I got tired of being of the image on the right. I got tired of photos being taken of me and showing my belly fat. So it would have been quicker. This took a number of months. It would have been quicker. But I happen to have the hand tools available, you know, the shovels, post hole diggers, and less mess to deal with than, let's say, a backhoe or a ditch witch. And they, from my point of view, they were more cost effective. I'd rather spend money on trains if I didn't have to spend it on other things. And so that was in. And then the next project after that was the stairs. As you can see, I've taken off the treads. The image on the right, I've got the stringer ready to go. I basically clamped the 2 boards together after cutting for the bottom and where it met the wall on top. Then I just took the pencil, I drew all these lines here, and then took them and cut them with a circular saw and hand saws. And I stripped the paint off the original one and then sanded it. And so they are glued and screwed together. The steps are much better today. I did, so this is going down to the train room now. Much better steps, more pleasant environment in the train room. After that, the next step was tackles the floor. I did a lot, as you can see in the image on the left, patching some holes. On the right, what I've done here, as with the walls that have already been painted with the floor, you have to scrub it with an etchant before you use the concrete stain. So since tape won't adhere to the outside walls, I ran drop cloths and then tucked the ends in and you see along the lower edge into the trench. Did some taping off. You can see where the blue tape here in the left-hand image separates the train area from storage. And believe me, that particular room is packed from that point all the way solidly to the next wall. It's just packed with stuff. As I said, I tend to be a pack rat. On the right-hand image there, I was initially scraped and scrubbed even though I used drop cloths, there were errant paint drops here and there, cleaned them off, try to make sure there was no oil that had accumulated over 60 years. So I mean, a few months ago, that's what I was doing with that. And then you have to scrub it with an etchant and you have to hit it with the primer. And then I gave it 2 coats of the stain. And that's how the room looks now.
Beautiful.
So thank you. Thank you. The only thing that this image doesn't show is I did put in trim between the walls and the floor. I used, rather than wood, I used that plastic trim and then sealed the end with the best caulking I could get just at the edge, so that if by chance water ever does come in here, the idea is that it doesn't soak into the wood that's there, prevent the rotten mold that I had before. Thank you very much for that comment. Since the room was done, I actually can focus on the layout. And I took the original track plan I was going to use and removed as much of the structures and stuff as possible. And then according to the plan, I divided it up into 12 modules, starting here in the lower left, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see the black line separating them, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. The circles are where I anticipated I would need legs. There were 20 of 8 of them in total. I found, well, okay, let me step back. Yellow lines here are where I put in additional supports. There may be some more going in, but that's where I found that the plywood I cut for the decking needed a little bit more reinforcement. I also found that I did not need quite as many legs as I originally thought I did, because when I butt up like this 24-foot wide by 6-foot section with this 2-foot wide by 2-foot section and screwed them together, this actually became a 2x4 sitting down here, which was plenty strong enough. One of the next steps while I was waiting for floors to dry, I began working on the legs for the layout. And being an inveterate pack rack, it's got been over a decade ago. My daughter-in-law worked as the freshman class advisor for a local high school, and my son was a carpenter then. And he was drafted into building the framing and stuff for the freshman float. After it was done, they were going to toss everything. I was able to salvage. These are 2x3 foot legs. A lot of them were straight, a few twisted. So I took them, gave them a couple coats of Kills paint. Actually, I didn't have quite enough 2x3, so I ripped some from 2x4s. And the ones that 2x4s I ripped were actually the ones that really needed the 2 coats because something was coming through. And then I painted them the same color as the floor. It was a light rattan color. Then this is nothing original, but in each of them, I decided which was going to be bottom, drilled a hole, put in a T-nut, and then put in adjustable feet, because basement floors are not even at all. And this way I could, once I get everything basically in, I can adjust the level. I still have that to do yet. I use several different methods for doing the joints when I was making my modules. Here you can see, if you look, and you can see that the arrow is, I was using a biscuit joiner. And then in the right-hand image, you can see where I actually after they're glued, I have them together with different clamps. This little 12 by, I think it's 12-foot 5-inch section is designed for the cutout. I'll show you in a minute. I mean, it's a really firm joint. I use Titebond 3 wood glue, which is supposed to be waterproof. Oh, I should note the sheetrock I used in the basement was all the moisture resistant sheetrock. So there's the beginning of the room going in. You can never have enough clamps, believe me. and different sizes. I had to go out and buy some more 2-foot bar clamps. Over here in the right, you can see where that cutout is. The reason I made this section that goes along the wall in the way I did is that I have some overlap here. It turned out that this distance was a nominal 6'5" rather than, 12'5" rather than 12 foot. So I have some overlap here where things are glued together. And this board here actually becomes an effective 2x4 rather than a 1x4. So let's see, that's the initial stuff. Oh, one of the reasons I began working on this area is because I had some 2x6 sheets of 1/4 Luan plywood. And I made that just as a workbench, which proved very useful for holding tools. Okay.
DC, how tall are your legs? I'm sorry, I missed that if you
Okay,
mentioned it
no, okay.
earlier.
The leg, I didn't mention it, but the legs are actually 48 inches. A nominal 48 inches.
Got it.
And then you have to make an allowance for the about a 1/2 inch for the feet, the adjustable feet, just if they're screwed all the way in, that's about a 1/2 inch. And then on top of that, there's going to be, as you can see on the left here, the Luan plywood, which adds another 1/8 inch. It's 1/8 inch. And on top of that, 1 inch, possibly 2 inches of styrofoam. So
Okay.
the layout height is a basic about 51 inches off in height. Okay.
Okay.
Which works for me.
Mhm.
Doesn't work. It doesn't work so much for Donna. She gets a great scale person's view of the layout, but for me, it works good for working on. This on the left-hand image is the water pipe that I had to do a cutout, basically putting a square up against the wall, doing one line, putting a square up against the wall, doing the other line. Yeah, after carefully placing and squaring the piece of plywood, then drilled a 3¼ inch hole and then cut in from the edges. It slid in perfectly. This is how I did the allowance to get around the pipe. You can see the second method. After I decided that going with a different method for doing the modules, I basically took a piece of scrap 1x4 to the 3½ inches, which is the width of the actual 1x4s. And I glued, and then I used some wire brads in the corners, my nail gun, and after that was dried, I drilled a hole and put in a screw, so it's very solid, gives this a much better gluing face, and then I screwed in from the outside into this board rather than into the 2x4, because gluing into this side grain gives a much stronger hold. Again, I used a lot of scrap wood and leftovers accumulated over the years. What you see here, you see the top of the leg, then you see the dark brown wood, which is a piece of 1x4, and then the actual outside frame of the outside frame, and then there'll be a fascia on the other side of that. So this gives me about 2 inches here, because when I do the curtain underneath the layout, I wanted to make sure I had enough space to work with the curtain and not have to build out from the front afterward.
Mm.
Next image, come on, Okay. Even though it was on the plan that I was going to do this originally, when I actually built the module, I got ahead of myself. So that's what those two holes are there. Because when the module was actually pushed up against the wall, it wasn't going in the way it was supposed to. But here you can also see how it allows plenty of access to the water meter and then the shut-off valve. This original shut-off valve still there. The shut-off valve at the street was frozen, so we couldn't shut that off on Sunday. And I didn't want to deal with the city of Newark. I'm still waiting for them to call me back. It's been about 2 weeks for a permit for some outside work I need to do. There shows how I clamped the modules together. Again, the piece in the back using used lumber. On the right, on the left here, I'm sorry, you can see how there's a couple pieces of used lumber. It happens to be a sheet. It was a plywood door that I got sometime in the past, probably in the 70s or 80s. Likewise, probably in 1980 sometime, this piece of 1x4. What I've done I've done some drop down areas to allow for some kits. I've accumulated kits over the years. This happens to be one for a stone viaduct. I have 2 of the kits. I had the other one out and decided I wanted to make a longer viaduct. I got this one on eBay. I put the other one so it's going to be easy to access. And I can't find it now. So it was just going to be easier to access. And so there's only one shown here, but basically this is going to be a viaduct over what will be the Susquehanna River. That's me with as it stands a day or so ago. Quite happy. I can't tell here, but I'm actually smiling. If you look at the way the light's coming down, it's a little bit uneven. You'll notice this darker area is wider than this one. That's because I had placement of the lights. A lot of it depended on where the actual air conditioning ducts ran, and between this light and this light, there was one of us. There's a wider space. Let's see, we've got, oh, okay. Now this is a comparison so you get an idea of the track plan versus the modules. They're actually over here is going to be La Gare, which is French for station, and you'll see on the left here how Peninsula is and where how it's going to run. Then crossing the area here, which is going to be where those stone arches are. Back here, all the track work is going to fall within that the first 18 inches of that 2 foot by let's say 6 foot module. One of the things I wanted to point out, when I actually got down to it, the space, the layout was designed for a 12 by 15 foot area. It actually, I knew I was going to add some track in to fill out. It actually came down to this area across the back came out to be 12 foot, not quite 5 inches, 4 3/4 inches, depending on this outside wall here on the left. So, but I allows me to put a little bit more track in here. Also, rather than increase the depth or anything of these 2 areas on where the Gare is going to be over here and the Delaware River seen on the left, I widened the aisleway here. So it's actually about, rather than a 30-inch wide aisle, It's now like 34¼ inches here. And because some of my measurements could be a little bit off, comes out to about 34¾ inches here. I also, the length of this, rather than 15 foot, came out to 15 foot 4 inches, which means that this piece here was able to be extended from like to about 60 inches, 5 feet in length. And this one went to from 54 to 58 inches in length. So the reason I did it that way then is so if I had to do this layout again, again, I've designed it so I can take it apart and move it if necessary. But if I had to do it again, I would have liked to have allowed more space in these two areas between the city scenes. And I think Tony Custer just did something in Model Railroader about that. So what's next thing? Oh, this is cool. Again, when I worked for Sears, it's been probably a decade or so ago. I got these chairs. It's kind of cool because you can sit in them. You're going to be able to operate the layout from just the sitting position. They also are designed, I can lower them enough right now before the fascia. I can actually slide them underneath the bench work to get them out of the way. That's basically it. I had about ready to run my track bus. I had questions for discussion. Should I wire the wire for the track bus go through the 1x4s, or should I run them under the 1x4s? I was hoping to get some feedback from active members.
Well, DC, my suggestion definitely would be through the frame. So the bus line stays where it's supposed to stay. Gravity doesn't take effect later. And you can, granted, if you have to take it apart, yeah, you got some trouble there, I guess. But you could always create a U access as well.
Well, what I plan to do, let me get back to the previous one. These are all held together. I just have to unscrew them and take them apart, and like modular construction, run a knife between the joints. And I was going to, this will be like three areas. There'll be one power district for the Avella, one for the Lagar running to about there, and one for the river scene running on the other side here. So I've already planned to be able to, where the modules are, to be able to have disconnects there, to be able to take them apart.
Oh, well, that excellent idea. Forget it. Good job.
I've been learning from everybody's mistakes. The plus side is that you're learning from everybody else, what everybody else has done and what they consider their mistakes and what their solutions have been. I also got to practice on Tom's layout for 20 or so years, and so I can make my mistakes there. Right, Tom?
Yeah, sure did.
Yeah. So the disadvantage is that I don't know, I'm getting to the point where if I'm to get this section of the layout done, that's why I did it as loop to loop. It may be as much as I'm able to get done in this lifetime. So we'll see.
Cool.
Okay. Any questions or comments?
Incredible.
Mm.
I hope I didn't put everybody asleep, but thank you.
You're an incredible craftsman.
Yeah, I was about to
Tremendous.
say, if the layout looks half as good as what you've table worked, Tom, look out.
Yeah, I'll never see him again.
Exactly.
Oh, Tom, this chair I got when I was planning it, I got one for you.
Right. Yeah, I remember that text you
Oh.
sent me. Yep. Yep.
That's
And
nice.
actually, the cleanest room in the house right now is the train room.
Yep. It's funny.
Looks
Yeah, it's great
beautiful.
stuff, man. Good work.
Thank
Good
you.
work.
Congratulations.
Let's see, stop share. There we go.
Beautiful work. Beautiful work. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom, I'm turning it over to you. What do you think?
Okay. Yeah, I guess we're good to go. Anybody have any questions or comments with respect to anything? Okay. Great to see you all. Good to see you back again. Vince, haven't seen you in a while. Super. And Chris, great job. Man, I tell you, I can't
Oh,
wait to
that's
see what you
Yeah.
do next.
And Chris, I want to, I have some questions to ask you after I get to look at it again online.
Okay.
So
Feel free anytime.
it's just amazing.
All right,
Amazing
gentlemen,
stuff.
we'll see you in a couple of, yeah, it's a couple of weeks, right? This is the end of the weekend, right? Okay, thanks for showing up. Take care.
Okay.
Be
Have a
well.
good weekend.
Thanks for everybody.
All right, guys. Well done as usual. Where is it?
Bye, Walter. Bye, Andrew.
All right, guys. We'll see you, man. Well done today. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks
Thank
for
you.
showing up yesterday too, Roger. Take care.
Oh, no problem. Whenever I can help now.
Cool, baby. Good. All right, man. There's another
Thank you,
one.
Tom.
In the can.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to click the leave button and then wait for a half hour.
Yeah, I think it's good. It's recording on mine because I'm still here. Yeah, I think, yeah, we'll just end this so we can get this done and get the recording going, and I'll check you out next week sometime.
Sounds good. You have a fun trip.
Cool.
Love to Queepo.
Yep. All right. Thank you. She sends it back. Cheers, babe.
Okay. Take care.